let's look at the DSM and the criteria for major depressive disorder. Now, we do know that there are different disorders that are within this depression kind of umbrella, but the one we're going to be focusing on is major depressive disorder. And so let's just review this so we can reorient ourselves to the core symptomology. 5 or more. And this is for children and adults, and you'll see a little bit of a distinguishment here between children and adults, but 5 or more of the following 9 symptoms. And at least one of those has to be depressed mood and loss of interest or pleasure. We also know that the DSM says that it has to be within this same 2-week period. And so that there needs to be a level of presence here in this specific period of time. So these core symptoms are depressed mood, whether the client's reporting it or you or others are observing it, loss of interest or pleasure, which again is one of those requirements in addition to depressed mood, change in weight or appetite. So that's something that we typically see is somebody has gained weight or they've lost weight. We also see that individuals can have insomnia or hypersomnia, so sleeping too much or having a hard time sleeping. Psychomotor retardation or agitation, and that can present in a variety of different ways when we see depression. So we may see that the person's moving slower. We may see that they are hunched over. We really see a lot of changes perhaps in movement, or the person maybe is a little bit more restless, which could indicate some anxiety, but also can be present when we are looking at depression. Loss of energy or fatigue, feeling a greater sense of tiredness, of lower energy, of not being as ambulatory or functional as previously. Worthlessness or guilt, impaired concentration or indecisiveness, thoughts of death or suicidal ideation or a suicide attempt. So 5 of those 9 symptoms. We also know that, just to expand our conversation, when we go beyond major depressive disorder, dysthymia, so looking at clients that for this period of 2 or more years have presented with this core symptomology. And so we really want to be looking at how behavioral activation may also be very helpful for those individuals that have more of this long-term depression or have a combination of depression and anxiety. The other group that we're seeing behavioral activation may be very helpful with is people that have bipolar disorder, especially when they're in that low mood state and are really struggling with depression. We may find that some of these approaches can be especially helpful. We also have persistent depressive disorder. And so in children and adolescents, the mood can be irritable and the duration must be 1 year or longer. And so we look at, again, kind of this dysthymic pattern of this longer term depression, 2 or more years. And again, we have some of the same core symptomology. The biggest distinguishing here is going to be the time frame. Major depressive disorder is going to be a shorter time frame, whereas your dysthymia, persistent depressive disorder, is going to be longer term. One of the other things that we're charged with as clinicians is being able to differentially diagnose clients and realizing that there can be many different medical, psychiatric, and medications that can really look and present as depression and major depressive disorder, but may not actually be. And so these are just important disorders and medications for us to be aware of so that we are making sure we're considering all factors. As you know, when we're trained as diagnosticians, one of the rules is we have to rule out other things first. And so this particular slide here or image is just as a tool for you to be able to see what are some of these other psychiatric disorders, for example, that I really need to be paying attention to see if maybe the depression is a symptom of maybe one of these disorders. Same is true with medical disorders, and then also look at the different medication categories that you want to be taking inventory with your clients. What medications are they taking? Not that you are a physician or a psychiatrist, but that you have some level of awareness of how their medications may interfere with their mood and their mood patterns. So what I'd like to do is, I think it's important as we're talking about diagnosis and before we get into treatment, that we talk about screening and assessment. For those of you that do need diagnosis and treatment CEUs, these do qualify as a diagnosis and treatment CEU because we are talking about diagnosis, screening, assessment, and then also treatment of depression. So just wanted to mention that. You all are, I'm sure, familiar with probably, not probably, but the most commonly screened tool used in primary care settings is the PHQ-9 or the Patient Health Questionnaire. And with this particular screening, we are able to get a sense in a very short number of questions what the client may be dealing with. And as you heard in the video, a lot of the things that our man in the video is was dealing with his depression, you see represented here in the PHQ-9. So we look at feeling down and hopeless. We look at that poor appetite, and you saw the visual of the dog actually standing on the man's food, preventing him from being able to eat and enjoy a meal. We also see here that the PHQ-9 looks at concentration. And then finally, that last question, which is very important, always wanting to assess the presence of suicidal ideation. We know that major depressive disorder is the most correlated mental health disorder with suicide. Above any other disorder, major depressive disorder has the biggest correlation and risk factor for suicide. And so it's very important in our screening and assessment and conversation with clients that we are not just initially, but we are continuously assessing that with our clients that are depressed. The other thing I'll mention is don't just go off of the demeanor of your client. If you have a client that has been historically depressed and they come in and their mood is lifted and they're more cheerful, they're more engaged with you, you may perceive that as treatment's working, this is great, but this could be, this shift in mood, especially if they're not historically cheerful and energetic and engaged, could be an indication that they are suicidal and may have a plan and have some sense of peace and control and ownership of that plan, of their exit strategy. And so we need to be aware of just our intuitive sense in terms of observing clients and always asking them if suicide is present or not. And remembering that can change and fluctuate is important.